Annyeonghaseyo and greetings ninth graders. Welcome to one of our last lessons in our unit on environmental justice. This week we'll have a couple more lessons. Next week we'll actually have our final test for environmental justice and science all together. And then the week after that we're just going to wrap up, and then you're gone, you're done. We're going to be finished. And hopefully all of you can hang in there until then. I know it's been a real tough go with distance learning. It hasn't even been easy for me either. It's getting close to midnight. I'm still recording. It's been tough, but hopefully we can all make a final push in these last 3 weeks and finish strong. So our learning objectives for today are to understand how energy, and here when I talk about energy, I'm talking about electricity, fossil fuels, understand how energy and ethnic conflict intersect. And this is related to our language objective, which is to be able to explain how energy companies encourage ethnic conflict. And last year we were talking about this idea about refugees and how refugees are expected to be grateful that they're living in the places that they're at. However, I want our lesson today to sort of complicate that idea, because while yes, it's nice that the United States has welcomed, for example, the Karen people to the United States, at the same time, one of the largest companies in the United States, Chevron, used to be Unocal, they're sort of responsible for all of these human rights abuses which made the Karen people leave their land in the first place. So today, when we're going through this lesson, just kind of think about how the acts of U.S. corporations had a very large impact on the Karen community here in the United States. So we're going to start by talking about the Yadana pipeline. So the Yadana pipeline was made through a partnership between 3 groups. One was the Burmese government, the other was a very large French oil company named Total, and the third organization was Unocal, which is now part of a larger oil company called Chevron. And so these 3 groups, they help build these sort of offshore natural gas mining platforms in the ocean, and then they built this tremendously large pipeline through the Karen state into Thailand. And so they're basically exporting natural gas from Myanmar or Burma into Thailand. And so one of the big problems, of course, with the construction of this pipeline was that basically Chevron and Unocal, or Chevron and Total, were funding the Burmese government to continue human rights abuses against the Karen people. And so because this pipeline was going through Karen land, the Burmese government violently forced Karen people off of their land. They just kind of continued this sort of act of genocide which they had been engaging in, you could probably argue, since 1948. And so here's an image, of course, that all of you should be familiar with, the Burmese government burning a village down. The way this happens is just very similar, not only in the Karen state, but also to other ethnic minorities like the Jin minority, which is to the north of the Karen people, and also the Rohingya people who are living in the west of Burma. And so all these people, their villages get attacked. First it's mortar fire, which are these sort of they're like bomb launchers, I guess you could say. They're like little mini bombs. They're kind of small. They fit in your hand. You put them in a tube and they get launched, and when they land they explode or they can burst into flames. Anyways, they launch these and they try to destroy as much of the village as possible with these explosions, and then afterwards the soldiers move in. If there's anyone who's left in the village, they kill them, they shoot them, and if there are youngish or younger women in the village, they do terrible things to them, and then they kill them as well. So it's just a horrific situation. So people are killed, women get raped, and then on top of that, they force a lot of the survivors that they capture into building this pipeline. And so here we can see a group of Karen people who were fleeing the destruction of their village. They're walking on a very large, wide road. This is the Yadana pipeline, and these people were eventually forced to work on this pipeline as slaves. So just to kind of wrap up with the Yadana pipeline, there was a lawsuit against the organization Unocal in the United States, and lots of politicians from the United States and lots of very powerful organizations in the United States fought against the Karen people to deny them any compensation for their losses. They wanted to deny them any money for their losses because, you know, the crimes happened in a different country, and since they happened in a different country, they didn't want to be responsible. Nonetheless, what ended up happening was, I don't even know what year it was. I want to say it was maybe 2004. The company Unocal made a multi-million-dollar settlement with some of the Karen victims, and this was one of the first times that the victims of a U.S. corporation's atrocities were ever compensated. So it was a big deal. And of course, you know, this whole conflict sort of, I mean, of course it existed before, you know, oil was involved, but nonetheless, natural gas played a really big role, energy played a really big role in this conflict. And so when we talk about energy, this was energy going to Thailand, Thailand has decided that they're going to make some changes in their energy policy. They're going to go green, which means they're going to stop focusing on fossil fuels. They're going to focus on renewable energies. And this sounds like it should be great. You know, as we know, fossil fuels are causing environmental destruction. Projects like the Yadana pipeline are terrible for the Karen people. So the Thai government wants to decrease its fossil fuel use, and they have goals for renewable energy set for 2035. And so the government of Thailand, the Electrical Generating Authority of Thailand, has partnered with two other groups, China's Sinhydro Corporation and the Burmese government, in order to produce electricity through a dam in the Karen state. And so this is not the actual dam, and actually the dam in the Karen state hasn't been built yet, but this is a dam in Bonneville, California, and it's about the same size as the Karen Dam is going to be. So it's a really big dam. If you look at the top of this picture, you can see cars parked at the top of the picture by buildings, and so you can see how small these cars are in comparison to the dam. And this dam is going to be on the Salween River, and I know I'm butchering that pronunciation, so my apologies, but nonetheless, it's going to be on a river that goes through the Karen state and is sort of on the border of Burma and Thailand, and it's where a lot of our students are from. So in our last presentation on energy production, we talked about some of the negative aspects of hydroelectricity, which is using dams to produce electricity. So I'm not going to go into that too much, but there is a movement in the Karen state against this dam, and here we can see some younger kids at a rally against the dam. And so the dam is going to, of course, continue the genocide that's happening between the Burmese army and the Karen people. It's going to continue the displacement of Karen people, and in fact they're making estimates that about 21 villages, all in all roughly 30,000 people, are going to be displaced if this dam is built. And so that's not only the people around the actual location of the dam, but what the dam is going to do is going to flood a large area upstream of the dam, and so that floodplain is going to push all the people living there into different places. And of course, in order to build the dam, the Burmese army is going to continue enslaving Karen people. And as I mentioned, that floodplain is going to destroy a lot of farmland and a lot of villages. And you know, people are saying that you know, it's green energy, we should encourage this type of thing, and it's important for the people in the area to have more electricity. because it's an area that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure. But in fact, 90% of all electricity that's produced by this dam is going to go to Thailand. So the benefit to the people that are living there is going to be very little. It's going to be marginal. So I want to go in a little bit more detail on some, I guess, the science of these disruptions that are going to happen from the dam. And I'm already at 10 minutes, so my apologies. I'm trying to speed up these videos as much as I can. But basically, along the Saoline River, people practice what we call floodplain farming or floodplain agriculture. And so the river floods every year during the rainy season. So it floods, it spills over its banks, and the river carries like lots of sediment, and a lot of that sediment is really rich in nutrients. It's really good for plants. And so after the floodwaters go down during the dry season, then there's an opportunity to plant along the area that was flooded, and that's now filled with this rich sort of nutrient sediment, and then you can grow lots of things really well. And so that's how they practice floodplain agriculture in Burma. This image shows you how they did it in Egypt, and I'm sorry because they don't have any images online of floodplain agriculture in Burma, just what you see in Egypt. But nonetheless, it's the same idea. So the river overflows its banks, and then you plant crops during the dry season, and then they grow really well because you're close to the river. So another problem or complication that you have because of these dams is, one, of course, it eliminates your ability to practice floodplain agriculture. All of the sort of nutrients and sediment that is supposed to be spread all along the length of the river, it just gets backed up behind the dam. And so you have this area behind the dam which is flooded and filled with these nutrients. And what ends up happening is algae, sort of this green plant on the surface of the water. It looks kind of like, I don't know, scum or dirt. It looks kind of nasty when it's on the top of water. Anyways, these plants begin to reproduce, and as they reproduce, they sort of block out the sunlight from reaching down deeper in the water. And deeper in the water, you have all these other aquatic plants which produce oxygen and provide oxygen for the water. But those plants, since they can't get sunlight, they die out. So the water becomes oxygen poor. And then when these algae sort of die and sink down to the bottom of the water, as they decompose, they also begin to pull oxygen out of the water. And so what ends up happening is that these areas behind dams become what we call eutrophic environments, which just means that they are oxygen poor environments. And so basically you have this big pool of oxygen poor sort of dead water behind the dam. And here we can see fish that are just actually dying because they don't have enough oxygen. And this is a diagram which kind of explains how this works, basically repeating the same stuff I'm saying. And this image here is an image of algae sort of proliferating in the area behind a dam. And I was going to mention, one thing that happens with dams is that when there's an increased need for electricity, then they release more water from behind the dam, and that in turn spins the turbines faster and you get more electricity. But it also sort of floods the area downstream with this oxygen poor water, and a lot of times what happens is it suffocates all living creatures, all the fish that are living downstream. And so this eutrophic environment is not only dangerous for the fish and living things upstream, but it's also dangerous for fish and living things downstream because they're going to be releasing the water, pouring it out, and that in turn is going to kill a lot of fish and wildlife downstream. So just to wrap up with this idea, while dams sound like they're great in theory, in reality, they can cause a number of environmental problems on top of the sort of political situation in which they're constructed. In Burma, it's going to increase genocide. It's going to increase human rights abuses in that area. And then I just wanted to wrap up by mentioning that this sort of conflict between ethnic groups and energy is not limited to the Karen state. There's a pipeline that's being built in western Burma, and this pipeline is going to go through Arakan province. It's going to go up into India. India's got this weird sort of eastern part, which is full of ethnic minorities who are also very much persecuted. And then it's going to go through Bangladesh and then into India proper to the city of Calcutta. And it's going to provide natural gas for that area. And so this pipeline is called the Shui pipeline, which I was reading means gold in Burmese. So anyways, this pipeline is very much connected to the Rohingya genocide of 2016. It's still ongoing, the genocide, unfortunately. And if you hear stories about what's happened to the Rohingya ethnic group, the stories are very similar to what's been happening with the Karen people. And one thing that people haven't talked about, though, is the role this pipeline is playing in what's happening in Arakan province. So the Rohingya are being displaced, and they're being displaced because that land that they occupy is very important for this pipeline. They're building the pipeline through this area where they're wiping out the Rohingya people. And so here we can see a Rohingya village burning. It's a very familiar image. We can see the Rohingya people fleeing, of course. Very similar image to what we see happening with the Karen people. And here we have a map of this pipeline that's going to be built through Burma, through the eastern portion of India, Bangladesh, and then finally into India proper. And I guess the one last thing I want to mention is that this pipeline is being built by a group of organizations. So of course India is very interested in, and as a country they're supporting the construction of this pipeline. So is the Burmese government, but also another company is very much involved in building the pipeline, and this is Daewoo from South Korea. So as a Korean person, I think it's important not just to champion all the great things your country does, but it's also very important to be critical and to want your country to do better. And in this particular case, Daewoo is very much supporting the Burmese military. It's a regime that has been guilty of all kinds of human rights abuses for decades, and it's something that I'm very much against. So I think as students who go to a Korean language immersion school with a very strong emphasis on Korean culture, that this is something to be aware of too, is that South Korea has a long way to go to improve its own human rights record as well. If you have any questions about any of the topics that we covered today, please hit me up at sjkrok@sejongacademy.org. You can also contact Mr. O at hoh1@sejongacademy.org. Also, I've got office hours every day from 9:30 a.m. until 10:30 a.m. Hopefully this was an interesting lesson for you. I'm sorry that I've just has to cram it into one lesson, and actually I feel like this lesson is getting a little bit long, so my apologies about that too. Anyways, I hope you all have a terrific day. And I'll talk to you tomorrow when I post the next lesson. Peace.